today I'm doing that thing where I go to a place that has a lot of abandoned stations and talk about them. I don't know if you can call this a series yet, or if there's enough places like that to... Okay, you know what, let's just get on with it. Today we are in and around Tower Hill. The first station we're going to look at is Cannon Street Road, not to be confused with Cannon Street, of course. This station was on the London and Blackwall Railway. Unfortunately, we know very little about it. It lasted only 8 years, from 1842 to 1848. There are no known photographs and no drawings known to survive. The entrance was probably under the bridge, but the section of the viaduct where it would have been was knocked down to make way for the Docklands Light Railway back in the 80s. If you want to visit yourself, it's on Cannon Street Road is where it is. The London and Blackwall Railway was an early commuter railway that opened in 1840, running between the City of London and the docks at Blackwall. It was originally built to a gauge of 5 feet, with carriages hauled by cables. The railway wasn't as popular as anticipated, which is why Cannon Street Road was opened 2 years later. A desperate attempt to attract more commuters by making the line a little bit more convenient. In 1849 they hit on the actual solution, which was to rebuild their railway to the standard gauge and run steam trains. This meant that their line became a useful route for other companies to use to get to the docks. It's so simple. In 1865 the operation of the London and Blackwall Railway was taken over by the Great Eastern Railway, and in 1877 they built the next station on our list, Leman Street. There's not much to see of this one either, apart from this bricked-up entrance under the bridge on Leman Street itself. I don't really understand the thinking behind building it. Cannon Street Road was never popular, and that's just a few hundred yards up the road. Anyway, Leman Street is an easy walk from the terminus, which I will talk about in a little bit. Leman Street was closed in 1941. Before we get to the terminus, though, we're going to take a detour to this building. It's just off Leman Street. This is known as the Pump House. In fact, this was part of the Commercial Road goods depot built by the London, Tilbury and Southend Railway. It was built between 1884 and 1887. This building was a powerhouse supplying hydraulic power for the machinery in the warehouses. The tower at the end would have housed a giant piston to regulate the water pressure. The development as a whole was rather controversial, involving as it did the demolition of numerous houses, 2 schools and 2 chapels, and their replacement with 100-foot-tall warehouses. Once again, it was never quite as popular as its builders hoped, although it did survive until 1967. The low-level section of the depot became famous locally for its part as an enormous air raid shelter during the Second World War, so some good came from it. Aside from the pump house, the area has been completely redeveloped. There were 3 goods depots over here. One, which was about here, was the London and North Western Railways, and was once the Hayden Square goods depot. The second, which was here at what was Goodman's Yard, belonged to the Great Eastern Railway. The third was opened in 1894 by the London and South Western Railway, and was here, but was sold on to the London and North Western Railway in 1901 and became part of the Hayden Square depot. Hayden Square was opened in 1853 in a former East India Company warehouse, but it closed in 1962. It was reached via a viaduct off the main line, and you can see the remains of it here. It recently narrowly avoided demolition, and now part of it is to be incorporated into the new development on this site. Sadly, the same cannot be said of the rest of the depot. As for Goodman's Yard, that was more or less alongside the main line. It opened in 1861, but was basically destroyed by bombing during the Second World War and never rebuilt. This was quite a popular place to build a goods depot, whether for the railway or otherwise. It was near to the city proper, without the expense and difficulty of building within the city itself, so those won't be the last goods depots we see. Well, I suppose technically we didn't see much of them, but look, let's not be pedantic here. Now, I did say that we'd look at the terminus of the London and Blackwall Railway. That was here, right next to and partially on the site of Tower Gateway Station. It was called Minories. Minories was opened in 1840, but it was only the terminus for a little over a year. The following year, the Blackwall line was extended to a new terminus. You might know it. It's called Fenchurch Street. Being the terminus, Minories was where the winding engines were located that hauled the carriages along the line before the whole thing was converted to locomotive haulage. Now, while Fenchurch Street technically made Minories obsolete, the two did coexist for a while, before Minories was closed down altogether in 1853. In 1858 it reopened as yet another goods depot. There is some debate as to how much, if any, of the original station survived. We can clearly see that there are bricked-up windows, doorways, and other architectural details that were part of the depot. And we believe that part of the station was incorporated into the depot. So, are we in fact looking at the remains of Minories Station? Unfortunately, yet again, the records are unclear. The goods depot was later leased to the Great Northern Railway and the Midland Railway. In 1951, under British Railways, the depot was closed. The remains, other than the ones we've already seen, survived for quite a long time. In fact, I remember seeing the Midland Railway accumulator tower, complete with signage, until it was demolished in 2015. I think it's a real shame that it couldn't be saved. Our final two stations are ones that I have given dedicated videos of their own, and if I remember, I'll put a link to them in the description below. But just quickly. The first one was here. It was Mark Lane Station on the District Line, or the Metropolitan District Railway as it was known back then. It was opened in 1884 and was intended to mark, so to speak, the completion of the Circle Line. The Circle Line was a somewhat unwilling collaboration between the Metropolitan District Railway and the Metropolitan Railway, with the District taking on the southern half and the Metropolitan the north. In 1946, Mark Lane was renamed Tower Hill. Unfortunately, it was quite a small station and couldn't handle the volume of passengers. So in 1967 it was replaced with the current Tower Hill, and that brings us on to our final abandoned station. You see, the reason this was such a good site for the current Tower Hill was because there had already been a station here. That station was called Tower of London, and it opened 2 years before Mark Lane in 1882. As I said, the collaboration between the Metropolitan and the District was rather unwilling, and the District were quite slow to get their half of the circle completed. So the Metropolitan hurried their half along and built a station of their own. They knew that the plan was to build a station at Mark Lane, they just decided to do their thing anyway. They threw a station together out of timber. It only lasted 2 years. Once Mark Lane opened, even the Metropolitan had to admit that it was kind of stupid having two stations serving the same line literally next to each other. So that is a brief overview of the many abandoned stations of Tower Hill. I must admit that when I started researching this video, I didn't realise quite how many companies were represented here. What all this shows is just how important Tower Hill and the surrounding area was to the city. And now there's very little to show that these companies were even there. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I might do more in-depth videos on some of these stations if I find further information. I would like, as I often do, to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon and here on YouTube for your support. You are the disused terminus to my goods depot. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.